The payments industry moves fast. The economics behind it move even faster. Welcome to On the Wire, a show about the economics of payments, the institutions moving money, and the infrastructure underneath it all. This episode is produced by Fedwire using AI voice synthesis, built from primary research, technical documentation, and real market data. No studio, no hosts, just the content, clearly presented. Let's get into it.
Imagine sitting in a toll booth on a global superhighway.
Oh, that's a good visual.
Right. And every single time someone buys a cup of coffee or pays for a streaming service or, orders inventory halfway across the world, you just get to take a cut.
A pretty massive cut, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Like a 3% cut of the entire transaction. You don't roast the coffee, you don't write the software, you don't manufacture any goods.
You literally just own the road.
You just own the road. And that is basically the reality of our current financial infrastructure. It's this invisible tax that almost everyone pays without ever really realizing it.
Yeah, and it's staggering when you look at the raw numbers behind that infrastructure. I mean, most businesses today are blindly handing over anywhere from 1.5 to 3.5% of their top-line revenue on every single transaction.
Which is wild.
It is. It's frequently one of their absolute largest operational expenses, yet it's treated entirely like the weather.
Like they can't do anything about it.
It's exactly like an unavoidable force of nature that they just, accept as the cost of doing business.
Well, today, we are going to pull back the curtain on that toll booth. Welcome to this deep dive where we're sitting down with you to decode the hidden, invisible mechanics of how money actually moves.
Yes.
And our map for this journey is a single, highly comprehensive guide published by Fedwire. It's titled Payment Rails 101, What Every Business Leader Should Know.
And the mission here isn't just to complain over merchant fees, right? The goal is to understand that the underlying tracks moving our money are actively shifting beneath our feet.
Right.
By understanding how to leverage those technological shifts, businesses can, drastically cut their costs, accelerate settlement times from days down to literal seconds, and completely revolutionize the checkout experience for the consumer.
It might sound like a dry back-office accounting topic, but I promise you this is a high-stakes, multi-billion-dollar turf war for the future of global commerce.
Okay, let's unpack this. What exactly are we talking about when we say payment rail?
Right, good place to start. Because we use the term constantly, but I really want to make sure we're defining the actual mechanics.
So a payment rail is simply the underlying digital network, complete with its specific set of rules, messaging standards, protocols that transfers money from one financial institution to another.
Okay.
And the Fedwire Guide uses a brilliant analogy here, comparing it to global shipping logistics.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, think about how physical goods move around the world. We rely on a really diverse mix of highways, railways, massive cargo ships, and air freight.
And a logistics manager chooses the method based entirely on the payload, the cost sensitivity, and, the urgency.
Exactly. The constraints dictate the choice. If you are moving thousands of tons of grain, you load it onto a cargo ship, it takes weeks to cross the ocean, but the cost per ton is virtually zero.
Right.
Conversely, if you are transporting, say, a live donor organ for an emergency transplant, you put it on a helicopter or a private jet, it costs an absolute fortune, but it arrives in an hour. Money works identically. The rail you select dictates the cost, the speed of settlement, the data payload, and the ultimate capacity of the financial transfer.
See, this is where I struggle with the current state of things.
Right.
You wouldn't charter a private jet to deliver a single pizza across town.
No, you wouldn't.
So why do businesses force tiny routine payments through the most expensive financial air freight available? Because right now, the guide outlines 4 major categories of these rails.
Right.
You've got card networks, ACH and SEPA, wire transfers, and instant payment rails. And yet, for everyday consumer transactions, we are almost exclusively defaulting to the absolute most expensive option on the menu.
We are putting that metaphorical pizza on a private jet billions of times a day.
Literally.
Let's examine those private jets first. The card networks, Visa, Mastercard, American Express. These are private proprietary networks that route payment data between the merchant's acquiring bank and the customer's issuing bank.
I think a lot of people, assume that when they tap their card at the grocery store, the money just jumps from their account directly to the store's account.
Yeah, that's the illusion.
Right. But looking at the source material, the authorization of the payment and the actual settlement of the funds are completely decoupled. It's a massive convoluted chain of intermediaries.
That decoupling is the crucial mechanic to really understand. So when you tap your card, your sensitive 16-digit data goes to the merchant's payment gateway.
Okay.
Then the gateway passes it to a processor. The processor fires it into the proprietary card network, which then finally knocks on the door of your issuing bank to ask, hey, does this person have the available credit?
So it's asking permission.
Exactly. Your bank says yes, places a hold on those funds, and that authorization message travels all the way back through the gateway to the terminal. You hear a beep, you grab your receipt, and you walk out.
But the merchant doesn't actually have the cash in their hand at that point.
No. They just have an IOU from the network. They get the actual money at the end of the day when all those authorizations are batched up and set for clearing.
Right.
And the cash settlement typically takes 2 to 3 business days.
And for that convoluted privilege, European merchants are surrendering, 0.8 to 2.5%, and North American merchants are bleeding even more, like between 1.5 and 3.5%.
Yep.
Not to mention the massive burden of PCI compliance, which essentially forces businesses to build these expensive digital fortresses.
And undergo massive audits.
Just to hold that customer data safely. Plus, the merchant absorbs all the risk of chargebacks and fraudulent disputes. Wait, it blows my mind that in an era where I can send an email instantly to the other side of the planet, complete with a high-definition 4K video attached, card money still takes 2 to 3 days to arrive while skimming up to 3.5% off the top.
It's wild when you put it like that.
Isn't this just a legacy tax at this point? Like, why are we settling for this infrastructure when the internet exists?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that legacy tax is exactly what is driving the market toward a critical tipping point.
Okay.
But to understand why cards still dominate despite the extortionate fees and slow settlement, you really have to look at the history. They have a 50-year first-mover advantage.
Right, they were there first.
They physically laid the copper cables. They built the point-of-sale terminals in every corner store. They put the plastic in everyone's wallets. And they tied it all to the allure of consumer credit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So until very recently, if you wanted to buy a pair of shoes in a physical store, there was simply no practical, widely accepted alternative to the card rail.
Okay, so if cards are the expensive, delayed private jets skimming our revenue, let's look at the cargo ships.
Yes, the cargo ships.
The guide contrasts cards with ACH in North America, which is the automated clearinghouse, and SEPA in Europe, the single euro payments area. These are bank-to-bank batch processing networks.
And they are the absolute workhorses of the financial system. The mechanism here is entirely different from the instant, individualized authorization of a card network.
How so?
With ACH or SEPA, all the transaction requests over a given period are piled into a giant digital box. And at set intervals, a central clearinghouse processes that entire box of transactions at once.
And the appeal there is strictly the price tag, right? The Fedwire guide notes that ACH costs a flat fee of around 20 to 50 cents, and SEPA is even cheaper.
Oh yeah, sometimes 10 to 30 euro cents.
That's practically free, and it doesn't matter if you're transferring $10 or $10 million. It's a flat, predictable fee.
Exactly, but you pay for that massive discount with your time and your user experience.
Right.
Because it relies on batch processing rather than real-time API handshakes, settlement still takes 1 to 3 business days. And from a consumer checkout perspective, I mean, it is incredibly clunky.
Yeah, I've tried doing that.
You need the recipient's actual bank account routing and account numbers, which you have to type in manually. It's fantastic for automating your monthly gym membership or running employee payroll.
Right. Things that happen in the background.
Exactly. But no one is going to type in a 16-digit routing number just to buy a sandwich.
So we are stuck in a bizarre binary. Cards are user-friendly but rob the merchant blind, while ACH is dirt cheap but far too slow and awkward for a modern checkout experience.
Exactly the problem.
We need a middle ground. What are the modern alternatives bridging this gap?
To find the middle ground, the guide first points us to the other extreme, which are wires. Think SWIFT for international transfers or Fedwire in the United States.
Okay.
These are the armored trucks of the payment rails. They are designed for massive payloads, where absolute certainty of settlement is the only thing that matters.
Meaning they require significant liquidity to operate and are notoriously expensive, because the guide lists wire fees ranging from $15 to $80 in flat fees per single transaction.
Yeah, very expensive. But they settle the same day or the next day with total finality. SWIFT relies on a complex web of correspondent banks holding Nostro and Vostro accounts across borders.
Which sounds incredibly complicated.
It is. They pre-fund these accounts to guarantee liquidity, which ties up massive amounts of capital. And that certainty is what you're paying the $80 for.
Right.
You would never use SWIFT for retail. You use it to, acquire a commercial skyscraper, fund a startup, or execute massive cross-border B2B supply chain payments.
But again, the heavily armored truck doesn't help us at the grocery store.
Yeah.
Which brings us to what the source material calls the modern miracle, instant payment rails.
Yes.
This is the infrastructure attempting to solve the trilemma of speed, cost, and user experience all at once.
And this is where the real revolution is happening. These are real-time, bank-to-bank payment networks built on modern API architecture that settle transactions in seconds.
Wow.
Not days. Literal seconds, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
And this isn't some futuristic, theoretical concept. The guide emphasizes that this is rolling out globally as we speak. Like SEPA Instant launched in Europe back in 2017.
Right.
The UK has been running their faster payments network since 2008. Brazil launched PIX in 2020, which we'll get to in a minute because it completely rewired their economy. And the US Federal Reserve finally launched FedNow in July 2023.
The technological mechanism driving this shift is called account-to-account, or A2A. Instead of relying on that convoluted chain of gateways, processors, and proprietary card networks we discussed earlier, A2A utilizes open banking APIs.
Whoa.
The money moves directly from the customer's bank account to the merchant's bank account. The intermediaries are entirely stripped out of the equation.
And the resulting cost difference is staggering. I mean, in Europe, where this is more mature, instant rails cost merchants roughly 0.4 to 0.5% per transaction. In some networks, it's just a tiny flat fee. We are talking 50 to 80% cheaper than processing a traditional credit card.
Plus, the merchant receives the liquidity instantly. The cash is in their account, ready to be used to pay suppliers or staff before the customer has even walked out the door.
I have to ask, if money is moving in literal seconds, bypassing the entire 50-year-old Visa and Mastercard security apparatus, and there is no PCI compliance required, doesn't that open the floodgates for fraud?
It sounds like it would, right?
Yeah. You're basically taking the seatbelts out of the car to make it lighter. How can this possibly be secure without the PCI compliance that card networks demand?
What's fascinating here is the reality is the complete opposite. It is profoundly more secure, which is exactly why merchants are flocking to it. Yeah, the secret sauce replacing the old PCI compliance model is a mechanism called SCA, or Strong Customer Authentication. When you initiate an instant A2A payment, your bank requires you to authenticate the push directly, usually using the biometric sensors already built into your smartphone, like your Face ID or your fingerprint.
So the bank verifies it is physically me before the money ever leaves the account, rather than hoping it was me and trying to claw it back later.
Exactly. It's bank-level cryptographic security applied at the consumer level. And because of this architectural shift, A2A payments actually reduce fraud by roughly 95% compared to cards.
95%.
Yeah, think about the inherent vulnerability of a credit card. If someone steals that 16-digit number, they can spend your money anywhere on the internet. But with an instant bank transfer, stealing your account number is useless to a thief.
Because they don't have my face.
Right. They don't have your physical face or your thumbprint to authorize the push notification from your banking app. For merchants, this virtually eliminates the existential dread of chargebacks.
Okay, to make all these abstract percentages and acronyms real for you, the listener, we need to apply them to a tangible situation. The Payware Guide features a fantastic real-world scenario called the 10,000 euro showdown.
I love this example.
It's so clear. Let's walk through it. Imagine a mid-sized B2B supplier needs to collect a 10,000 euro invoice from a client.
Okay, so if that supplier accepts a credit card, assuming a relatively standard 1.2% rate for their volume, the mere act of receiving their own money costs them 120 euros.
Ouch!
Yeah. They then have to wait 2 to 3 days for the batch clearing, and they're carrying the moderate risk of a chargeback while maintaining the digital fortress of PCI compliance to hold the card data.
120 euros evaporated into the toll booth just to move the money. So the supplier looks for alternatives if they demand a wire transfer.
A wire hits them with a flat fee of 40 euros. They get the money the same day, and the transaction is final. But the friction here is on the client side, who often has to log into a clunky corporate banking portal or even call their bank to manually authorize the wire release.
What if they use the cargo ship, standard SEPA or ACH?
That is the absolute cheapest route. Moving that 10 grand costs a flat fee of just 20 cents.
Wow.
It's practically free.
Right.
But again, the trade-off is the severe delay. The supplier is waiting 1 to 3 days for the funds to actually clear, which ties up their working capital and prevents them from reinvesting the funds immediately.
And finally, the modern miracle, the instant rails.
At a typical 0.5% rate for an A2A transfer, moving the 10,000 euros costs 50 euros. It's less than half the cost of the card. The settlement happens in seconds, providing immediate liquidity, and the biometric authentication means there is virtually zero fraud risk.
Looking at those options, the smartest move isn't to just blindly pick the cheapest one, right? Because 20 cents is great, but waiting 3 days isn't always viable if you need that liquidity to make payroll.
Exactly.
And 50 euros is great for speed, but maybe not if the client aggressively prefers the 30-day float of their corporate credit card.
That nuance is the core of the source materials argument. The goal isn't to champion one single rail as the ultimate savior. It's about adopting a multi-rail strategy.
Okay.
Smart businesses are building payment architectures that dynamically route transactions through the lowest cost, most efficient rail based on the specific context of the moment.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like a business installing an automatic transmission for their finances.
Oh, that's perfect.
You wouldn't drive a sports car in first gear on the highway. The system automatically shifts gears into the cheapest, fastest rail for whatever financial terrain the transaction happens to be on.
That analogy tracks perfectly with a case study the guide features. They profile a major European e-commerce merchant who implemented this exact dynamic routing.
How'd they do it?
Well, for standard domestic checkouts, their default gear is instant rails at 0.5%. If the customer's bank doesn't support it or they abandon the flow, the system seamlessly falls back to offering traditional cards as a secondary option.
But for international customers, the instant rail networks aren't fully linked up globally yet. So the merchant automatically shifts back to the card networks to ensure the cross-border sale goes through without friction.
Exactly. Furthermore, for their recurring subscription revenue, they bypass both and use standard SEPA direct debit.
Oh, because it's cheap.
Right. Since subscriptions aren't highly time-sensitive, the merchant is perfectly happy waiting 2 days for clearance because they were paying a tiny flat fee instead of a percentage.
Looking at the data from the guide, the financial impact of this automatic transmission is staggering. By shifting the volume dynamically, they dropped their overall average payment cost from 1.2% down to 0.9%.
Yeah.
Now, a 0.3% difference might sound like a rounding error, but that is a 25% reduction in their total payment processing bill. That is pure profit injected straight to the bottom line without selling a single extra product.
And the secondary benefit was arguably more impactful than the fee savings. By moving their recurring subscriptions off of credit cards and onto direct bank rails, they cut involuntary churn by 20%.
Unpack that, because involuntary churn is the silent killer of subscription businesses. Customer acquisition costs are astronomical, so losing a user just because their payment mechanism failed is agonizing.
It's a massive leak in the bucket. When you rely on cards, you're tying your revenue to a piece of plastic with a 3-year expiration date.
Oh, true.
Cards get lost, stolen, or naturally expire. When that happens, the subscription payment fails, and unless the customer proactively logs in to update their details, you lose them forever.
You just lose the revenue.
Exactly. Bank accounts, however, don't expire. A person might keep the same checking account for 40 years. By routing over SEPA, the merchant sidestepped the plastic entirely, ensuring the payment connection remained unbroken.
So if this multi-rail strategy, this automatic transmission, is reducing fees by 25%, drastically cutting churn, and providing instant liquidity, why isn't every business on Earth ripping out their old terminals today? Like, what is the actual hurdle?
The guide addresses this head-on, dedicating a whole section to busting the myths that hold leaders back. The primary hurdle is psychological.
How so?
There is a persistent misconception that instant rails are an experimental beta test, something too new and unproven to bet enterprise revenue on.
People look at A2A and think it's a niche tech fad.
But the data proves otherwise. The UK's Faster Payments Network isn't a pilot program. It handles over 95% of all UK payment volume today.
95%?
In Brazil, the PIX system didn't just find a niche, it captured 60% of the entire national market in a mere 3 years. SEPA Instant is standardized across 36 countries. The infrastructure is robust, battle-tested, and frankly, it is the new global standard.
The other major anxiety is the integration cost, right? Business leaders hear new payment architecture and assume it means a multi-million-dollar IT project that will tear up their existing plumbing and disrupt checkout for months.
And that's the second myth the guide dismantles. You weren't switching rails or tearing anything down. You were simply adding options to the checkout layer.
Okay, so it's a later lift.
With modern API plugins, integrating an instant A2A option alongside an existing legacy card gateway only takes an average e-commerce merchant about 2 to 4 weeks of developer time.
Which brings us to the interoperable future. The next decade isn't going to be about presenting a customer with a confusing drop-down menu asking, hey, do you want to use the ACH rail or the SEPA rail today?
No, not at all.
It's going to be single API networks routing these payments completely invisibly in the background. The consumer just sees a simple pay button.
That interoperability is exactly where Payware comes into the picture. The source material outlines Payware's specific role not as a bank, but as a neutral transaction resolution network.
Right.
They build the bridge that makes this complex multi-rail strategy seamless for both the merchant and the consumer.
Right. Payware itself never holds the funds. They don't compete with the banks. They just act as the highly secure messenger, handling the cryptographic handshake between the customer's bank and the merchant's bank so the money can flow over those instant rails. And they offered this routing for a flat 0.5% fee with instant settlement. But diving into their API capabilities, the part that absolutely blew my mind was the initiation methods.
Oh, yeah?
They list 7 different ways to trigger these instant bank-to-bank payments. QR codes, NFC tapping, Bluetooth Low Energy, text message links, barcodes, and sound bites.
Yep, sound bites.
Wait, did you say soundbite? So I could theoretically walk into a store and my phone just plays a specific audio tone to the register and boom, the money moves bank-to-bank instantly over these new rails. That sounds like science fiction.
I knew you were going to latch onto that one.
I mean, it's crazy.
It sounds like sci-fi, but the underlying engineering is incredibly elegant. Instead of relying on a radio frequency transmission like a traditional NFC tap, the customer's smartphone emits a high-frequency sound wave, one that is often completely inaudible to human ears.
Wow.
That sound wave carries a dynamic encrypted transaction token. The standard microphone on the merchant's point-of-sale tablet picks up the sound, decodes the token, and securely triggers the API call for the A2A payment.
That is wild. It means a merchant doesn't even need to buy a specialized NFC card reader. If their iPad has a microphone, they can accept instant payments.
Exactly. No new hardware.
It makes the consumer experience of navigating these incredibly complex back-end rails totally frictionless. You don't type routing numbers, you just scan a code, tap a link, or play a tone, and the invisible infrastructure does the heavy lifting.
It's completely seamless.
So what does this all mean? If you're a business leader, an operator, or just someone endlessly fascinated by the hidden mechanics of our economy, the core takeaway from this deep dive is a fundamental mindset shift. The Fedwire guide is begging us to stop asking the legacy question. What payment methods do we accept?
Right.
Do we take Visa? Do we take Apple Pay? Stop thinking about the plastic card or the digital wallet wrapper.
We need to look deeper at the foundation. You must start asking, what actual rails are we using? What are the true mechanics of those rails costing us in fees, delays, and churn? And what modern interoperable alternatives exist today?
Yep.
Because the merchants and the financial institutions that optimize their rail selection now are building a massive structural and economic advantage for tomorrow. The first movers in this space get to define the economics of their industries.
It's about taking ownership of your own financial logistics instead of blindly paying rent on a 50-year-old toll bridge simply out of habit.
And this raises an important question, one that completely flips the script on how we as consumers interact with our money.
Okay.
If the future of global commerce is instant, hyper-secure, nearly free domestic bank-to-bank transfers driven by seamless A2A technology, what happens to the massive credit card reward ecosystems?
Oh.
Think about the airline miles, the luxury airport lounge access, the 2% cashback points. Those perks don't appear out of thin air. They're funded almost entirely by those hefty 3% merchant fees.
The toll booth.
The toll booth. So if businesses successfully route around the legacy card networks to save themselves billions, will optimizing payment rails ultimately kill the credit card points game entirely?
Oh, wow. So the expensive private jet we've been chartering is secretly funding everyone's frequent flyer miles. If the entire global economy starts taking the high-speed bullet train instead, the miles disappear.
They might.
The incentives completely collapse. That is a massive paradigm shift to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the invisible infrastructure of our money. The next time you tap to pay, just remember you might be chartering a private jet for a cup of coffee. Catch you next time.
That's On the Wire, produced by Payware, the transaction resolution network for instant A2A payments. This episode was AI generated from Payware's published research and documentation. If something sparked a question, the full source material is available at payware.eu. If you work in payments at a bank, an ISV, or a merchant organization, and what you heard is relevant to what you're building, reach out. The conversation doesn't have to stop here. Subscribe to On the Wire wherever you listen to podcasts. The next episode is already waiting.